So today's luncheon is a very special one for those of us in the media. This is the Arkansas Sportscasters and Sportswriters Hall of Fame induction. And this is a way to honor outstanding women and men in the business and the field of sports journalism. We have several Hall of Fame members with us today. In fact, if you are a member of this Hall of Fame, please stand so we can recognize you. Anybody? I know Bob Holt here. There we go. So I'm not going to have a lot to talk about today, but I'm going to bring up Clay Henry, a guy who has always plenty of words. But before he comes up here to speak, today is Clay's birthday, 70th birthday. Can we give Clay a little happy birthday? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Clay. Happy birthday to you. There we go. That's all my singing time.
Thank you, Chip. I want everybody to look on your table and see the handiwork, Hawgs Illustrated magazine. Christina Long, our editor. So, I always wondered who was going to replace me. It's Christina Long, and she's done a wonderful job. And I live in Norfolk, semi-retired. The magazine comes in the mail, and it's like my baby has arrived, and I enjoy it every time it comes. Thank you, Christina. So my job today is to give a little weight to what's going on. And this is 16 years that we've been doing this. Organization started in Conway. Mike Harrison, who carried on, and it was his brainchild for about 12 years. And he went on vacation to Italy. And when he came back, he was Arkansas's first COVID case. We didn't even know what COVID was, and he was gone in a matter of a few days. They didn't even know that it was COVID. You always heard it came from France and Italy. He brought it back to Conway, and the doctors there had no idea what they were dealing with, and he was gone. But this was his deal. So it went away for about 3 years. Nobody had meetings. Nobody met. Nothing you could do to have a group like we have today in honor of sports writers and sportscasters. I went to Brent Powers, president of Northwest Arkansas Democrat Gazette, kind of my boss at Hawgs Illustrated. So we need to resurrect this. And so this is the third year. So we've had, we've honored a few more people, sports writer, sportscaster. Every year we did 4 one year to kind of make up for lost time. There's so many deserving candidates all across the state. And then I looked, we have a committee, that's a good time, Nate Allen, Matt Jones, Larry Foley, Harry King, Bob Holt, Steve Sullivan, Donna Lampkin-Stevens, that help me. And we have, in the winter, we have Zooms, and we select new inductees. And I kept looking at the list, and it said there's something wrong with it. It's Little Rock, Conway, Fayetteville, Little Rock, Fayetteville, Conway. It just went on like that all the way down. Jonesboro, nothing. And that's a big part of our state. I mean, it's a massive part of our state. So this year, our committee fixed that. So we had a luncheon in Jonesboro last week, and we honored Dick Clay, who is sports director for, I think, 27 years at KIT, Channel 8. He was the Paul Eels of Northeast Arkansas. And then Charlie Cromwell, Dick passed 14 years ago. Charlie Cromwell, who was the sports editor for 23 years at the Jonesboro Sun, then went to the Atlanta paper, Albuquerque paper. He's retired. So we honored those 2 men, and we're going to try to hit other places in the state. Texarkana has got 3 men that I know are deserving. In our committee, it was already talked about that. So we just kind of looked, and where are we missing? Fort Smith is another place that we were missing. And Charlie Jones just popped on our list in unanimous decision. We'll get more into that as we go through the program. But I wanted to read our list of sports writers just to kind of give you a feeling of what this group is. This is alphabetical. Nate Allen, Jim Bailey, Charlie Cromwell, Grant Hall, Wally Hall, Clay Henry, Orville Henry, Bob Holt, Harry King, David McCullough, Jerry McConnell, Joe McGee, Chris Mortensen, George Schroeder, Donna Lampkin Stevens, Bob Wisner, Wadey Moore, Joe Mosby. Just legends, and it just heavyweight guys all the way through. Here are the sportscasters: Chuck Barrett, Frank Broyles, ABC, back in the 70s. Bud Campbell, Dick Clay, that we honored Friday in Jonesboro. Dizzy Dean, Paul Eels, Jim Elder, Mike Harrison, Mike Irwin, Keith Jackson. Everybody knows Keith Jackson to ABC, but Keith Jackson, the football player, was a color analyst for the Razorbacks. Charlie Jones, George Kell, Mike Nail, Rex Nelson, Steve Sullivan, Pat Summerall, Terry Wallace, Dave Woodman. I'm just about done, but I've got to tell one story so everybody in this group can retell it. So Friday, Diana Davis, who's the current anchor at KIT, worked with Dick Clay. She was the presenter. So she did 10 minutes on Dick Clay, and we're about done because Dick Clay is going to accept, and all he's going to do is say thank you and take the plaque, and we're done. Now I thought, we're going to finish a little early. And a guy stood up in the back, and he says, "Whoa, I'm going to talk." And the best I can do with his name is it's Coach Stockton. Anybody knows Arkansas State, you might know that name. His first name has slipped me right now. But he said, "I've got to put everything in perspective today." So, okay, Dick Stockton, or Coach Stockton's going to talk. He says, "I was on Coach Broyles' staff as a GA." I still didn't recognize him or the name. And he says, "And I coached at Arkansas State," and he named the number of years. I think he was on Coach Lacewell's staff. And he says, "I'm going to take you back to 1994, a Monday night." Anybody know where I'm headed? 1994, what happened on a Monday night? So Dick Clay opens his sports show at 10:20. He's got 3 minutes. And there is video of a brand new indoor workout facility at Arkansas State University. He takes you through it, takes you to the locker room, talks for 2.5 minutes. The credits roll. And he said, "In other news, Arkansas won the national championship tonight." That's a sports writer that knows knows his market. I'm going to turn it back over to Chip.
All right. As always, thank you, Clay. So, we got two legends that we are going to recognize today. The first one is Grant Hall. I had the honor of working with Grant at the Morning News of Northwest Arkansas when it was still in existence for several years. Grant is someone that us in the business would call a pro's pro. Okay? Always a great ambassador for the newspaper, did his job in the most professional manner, regardless of whatever assignment he had. He was a sports reporter for the Northwest Arkansas Times for 20 years, then spent another 20 years with the Morning News. Retired in 2009. He's had a long and distinguished career in radio as well. So I got to tell you a story about Grant. This was like right before he retired. When I first came up here from Fort Smith, I had a real young sports reporter who was covering the Hawgs football team named Robbie Nicewarm. And Robbie had spent time here and covered the Hawgs, and he had gotten what those of us in the business would call a little bit better opportunity to go to a little bit bigger paper at the Clarion Ledger in Oxford, Mississippi, to cover Ole Miss. So he packed up his U-Haul and he left and took his wife, who had never left Northwest Arkansas in her life, maybe on a couple of shopping trips, but never left for long. Took her to Oxford. She did not like it there at all. If you've ever been there, you probably know what I'm talking about, okay? She didn't like it. Robbie was okay, but wife didn't like it. And you know how Grant, how it goes. If mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. Okay, she was not happy. So Robbie, it was looking to come back here and take care of the family, which is what we should do. So Grant did the most selfless thing I believe I've ever seen anybody do. Grant came in my office and he said, you know what? I know Robbie wants to come back here. I'm going to go ahead and retire, leave my position open, and I want you to go hire Robbie back for his family. Now that's a hell of a deal, okay? I've never in my life ever seen anybody be that selfless. And Grant, I hope you don't mind me telling that story, but I had to tell that. So although Grant was born in Louisville, Kentucky, he got to Arkansas as fast as he could, right? As fast as he could get here. He's longtime guy here, graduated from U of A, just such a privilege and honor for me to work with Grant for a long time. Grant's longtime friend and former University of Arkansas Sports Information Director Rick Schaefer, they've been friends for a long time. They used to host a call-in show called Sportsline Live. Here's what Rick had to say about Grant.
In July of 1976, I had the privilege of coming to the University of Arkansas to work in the Sports Information Office. At that time, Grant Hall was the sports editor of the Northwest Arkansas Times, and he was very good at what he did. He covered the Razorbacks inside and out, every sport, football, basketball, baseball, everything. He was almost a one-man show. Really, really good. He also knew Razorback history like nobody, except maybe Orville Henry, who's probably the greatest Razorback historian ever. Grant and I got to be good friends. We were competitors in tennis. He was a much better golfer than me, so he didn't really invite me to play golf very much. And in the early 1980s, believe it or not, he and I played on a softball team that featured Billy Ray Smith, Keith Burns, and Greg Skolman. It was a heck of a team. We were kind of the other players, but we did contribute. We enjoyed that greatly. Later, Grant and I teamed up to co-host a radio show we were on for years. Then we also co-hosted a television show on Safe Television that lasted well over a decade. It was always a pleasure to work with Grant. Grant's become a great friend. He's also a great professional, and he also likes to tell stories of the old days, like the 1969 Texas game. On the day of that game, because his father was the pastor at First Baptist Church Fayetteville, they had the honor of hosting Billy Graham in their home. I love hearing that story. Grant, congratulations to you. And the biggest thing about Grant is not so much of what he's done professionally and what he's done as a friend, but he's a follower of Jesus Christ, and that guarantees him a great life here and in the future. Again, congratulations, Grant.
Please help me welcome Grant Hall into the Arkansas Sportscasters and Sportswriters Hall of Fame.
Okay. Thanks everybody for being here. I'm going to start out because Zach Arns just told me I was going to do it anyway. He said, you always thank your wife first. So there's Audley. And in 4 days from now, it'll be 46 years of married bliss. And she's, without her, I'm nothing. So thank you. Hey, Nate. I didn't even see you back there. Nate Allen, thanks for coming. When Nate got inducted in Conway, we were happy to go to his induction. Nate and I think I started in late 72, and he started in 73, is that right, Nate? And so we were friends and competitors. I mean, nobody ever had a tougher competitor. I'd like to think that, I know you made me better. I'd like to think I made you a little better at times, but we were covering the same stuff, and an honor for you to be. Tom Murphy, I see back there too. Tom, thanks for coming. Let me continue with family though, because at this table 9 right here, so we start with the oldest. Jason works for Cox Communications, and we just enjoyed a family golf thing recently together, and I'll get to the rest of the family. Tracy, his wife, and if anybody ever wants church music, they're your pair, they're your duo right there. They can do it all. Scott, my number 2 son, there he is, 36 years old, I think, is that right? Yeah, got that one right. We've Scott has got me back on the golf course the last few. I'd about quit playing golf, and he began playing when he was 4 years old, and he was on television one time, and they asked him, what's the deal about golf? He said, it's just so hard to hit the ball straight, which is exactly right. If you've ever played golf, so he didn't play until he was about 31, and now he's been playing with a vengeance. So it's got me back out there. We've had a great time. Actually placed in a few golf tournaments. Let's see. Let's go to Joanna next. Joanna Braswell. I'm sorry, Anderson, her husband's a little bit under the weather today. He's here in town in Fayetteville, but he was Matt Jones' center in an Arkansas high school all-star game one time, and then went to James Madison and played for a tremendously successful team there. And we keep hearing about what they're doing in football and other sports. Claire, number one, the oldest child of three. And Claire is the sweetest person around, and she loves Anna, who is Jason and Tracy's daughter. Anna lives in Bentonville now, and the other day when she found out we were going to get together for a meal, she got here like in 35 minutes, which you can't do, but she made the effort to get there. And if you ever talk to her, it's like John Calipari. It's like you're the only person in the room. He's got that ability. She's got that ability. It's like the Pied Piper. So thanks for coming. And let's see, we're gonna, there's Allie. And if you're wondering about the UA gymnastics, she was in Jordan Weaver's camp for the third time this last weekend, and is doing great in that. 4 hours a day worth, you know, so keep an eye on Allie Braswell. Alice, as she's also called. And then Erin back there is, she knows more big words than any kid her age I've ever seen, and is a tremendous ping pong player. You know, we got the ping pong table up in the back, and they don't quite understand yet that the object of the game is not to hit somebody in the forehead as hard as you can, but to maybe hit it on the table a few times. But we've had fun with that. I was getting to Tom Murphy. Tom, thanks for coming. You know, anytime the Cardinals and Braves play, we have a little bit of trouble because there's no bigger Braves fan than Tom, and I'm a big Cardinals fan. And when do they start? They're playing 2, I think, at 12:45 today. So we'll get back to that. Does a great job covering everything at Arkansas. Let's look around the room there. Matt Jones, I want to mention that this is media Matt Jones because he's the one that called me on the phone to tell me about this thing, a couple of months ago maybe or something, and I just got goosebumps then thinking about the list that y'all already heard today, because these are my heroes. I don't want to start listing them because I'll leave somebody, but Harry King, Jim Bailey, and of course Clay and his dad, Orville Henry. I tell you a story about Orville. I went to the Masters for the first time in 1981, and the first night I was there, Orville took me to eat at the Holiday Inn, and he told me all the stuff that I needed to know about the history and Clifford Roberts and all these things about how he'd gotten to play one time. And years later, had the honor of actually being his sports editor for a year when he worked, you know, up here, and I could actually call him at night and talk about copy, and that was great fun. Let's see, Brad Dunn, we got it. Well, you know Brad Dunn. He's the you're behind this whole operation, right? Brad was part of that national championship coaching staff that you just heard about. And then we've recognized some people. Hey, Bob, thanks for coming. Bob Holt there, Hall of Famer out at Chip, of course. Appreciate all the help you gave me through the years, have given me. Mr. Westerman, whose dad is a congressman. Ethan does such a great job covering women's athletics and everything else. Christina Long, that's Jeff Long's daughter, by the way, and she's done a great job. And Zach, thank you for helping me stay in radio. Zach Arns got that call, and I still do 15 minutes a week on 99.5 with Phil Elson and the other Matt Jones through your help, and I appreciate that very much. And I want to talk about Tommy Boyer a little bit. You know, I called him last night and found out from Tommy that he had a connection with the Jones family. Charlie went on a tour. You played, after your college career, you played some what now would be probably equivalent to the McDonald's All-America game, right? And played some of those games, and Charlie arranged to put those on the radio. Tommy played for Gail Condart, the famous basketball coach at Fort Smith for all those years, and then at Arkansas. And I actually saw him play. He was asking me, he said, "How old are you?" And I'm 76. He's 83. But I saw him one time make about a 70-foot shot. Maybe, let's see, it was at the other free throw line, and he threw it like a discus, and the ball banked in. This was right before halftime. And he was amazed that I remembered this, but you're not going to forget something like that. But more notably, he led the nation in free throw shooting twice. Shot 94%, I think, one year with one eye. And they called him Cyclops. I remember he made 18 out of 18 in one game. I asked him one time, how do you play defense? You know, and he decided to just get right here, and I can see, and you know, and he was an amazing player. He and Pat Foster are still great friends. And and by the way, he's on the University of Arkansas Board of Trustees. So thanks, Tommy Boyer. Let's hear it for Tommy. I just met the Jones family today, and I did not know Charlie, but I certainly heard him many times, that inimitable voice, doing like in the old AFL, those games. Who could forget that? And I want to thank the Lindsay family. We got some Lindsay representatives here. Big Jim, who played 7 years for the Minnesota Vikings after this tremendous career at Arkansas. I don't know I think I can tell this story, can I, about the thing with the University of Minnesota. So after he finished his 7 years with the Vikings, and he was captain of the special teams for the Vikings, and he knew the entire playbook frontwards and backwards before they ever started the first camp. And so he had these 7 years as a player, and then he decided it was time to come back. So there was some interest from the University of Minnesota, and would he like to be the head football coach? I didn't know this till just a few weeks ago. John David was telling me. And so I think he actually talked to him and then decided, no, he wants to come back to the state of Arkansas, which of course they've done and had this tremendous business success all these years. And I think you told me, John David, he didn't really tell his wife until after the interview had taken place. But wow, I mean, you know, and he would have been a great coach one time. You know, one time there was a deal, I remember at First Baptist Church, Darrell Royal came, and Jim spoke, and it was, I can't even remember what it was for, but it was a big gathering, you know, and when Jim got done speaking, Darrell Royal said, "Hoss, I'm glad you didn't go into coaching." The story that Rick was referring to, and Lindy, I got to mention Lindy, 2 Southwest Conference championship teams, right? Tight end. Yeah, big enough to go to work. Hits a golf ball about 9 miles. And David often back there at that table, and Tom David is the super fan. And of course, Vernon Tarver over here on the end. Vernon Tarver Sr. and I worked together at old McElroy Bank before it was our best bank. I got a job when I was 16 years old or something working there. And so I actually worked with your dad, who sadly has passed on. He passed on not too long ago. But he would have these famous gatherings before football games, and everybody in town was there. I mean, people, I wouldn't know some of them, but I would know them after the party. And he lived just up the hill from the stadium. You could almost see the stadium from where he lived. And it was a great way to start a Saturday of football. Vernon covered all things Northwest Arkansas for a long time, Fayetteville High School, Arkansas, pretty much everything, UA baseball, and now with Springdale Parks and Recreation still, is that right, Vernon? And so it was such a fun thing to do radio with him all those years after also knowing his dad. Tim, the caretaker for Jim, glad you could come today. It's always good to see you. I'm sorry if I missed some of you, but again, it's just I wanted to kind of talk about one thing. In 1969, let's go back to, it was 1965, people confuse this, but Texas was coming to town, and my dad, as pastor of First Baptist Church, had a sign out there, and he used to put little slogans there, you know, things that might have Bible verses, whatever. So this huge game was coming to town. Media from all over the country. Jim Murray was here, and I mean, name the media person and what you know. I mean, you know the story. It worked out that Arkansas was number 2 in the country, and Texas was number 1 going into this game. The big shootout, December 6, 1960. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. That was 69. This is 65, and Arkansas actually beat Texas in 65, 27-24. But before that game, my dad put up on the sign, football is only a game. Eternal things or spirits will nevertheless beat Texas. And so the sign made the AP, back then it was called AP wire photo, then it was AP laser photo, but people sent us these photos from their newspapers, I think from all 50 states. It got the Stars and Stripes, you know, in the military overseas. And my mother kept a shoebox with all these clippings from the newspaper that people saw that, you know, and thought it was cool. And of course, the good part about it was Arkansas jumped ahead of Texas 20-0 that year. Texas came back, made it 24-20. Jim was playing, and the story goes, doesn't it, that he got them together on the sideline or was it outside the huddle? Was it on the sidelines, John David? And said, we are not going to lose this football game. About 4 minutes left to go in the game. They drove down the field. John Brittenham, quarterback and man, kept passing to Bobby Crockett. About 5 completions, I think, down to the 1-yard line. I think Brittenham sneaked in for the touchdown. Arkansas won the game 27-24. Didn't turn out quite that well in 69, but the story that Rick Schaefer told was that morning. That did happen. Now, it wasn't at our house. What happened was that Frank Broyles was entertaining Billy Graham, and he called my dad and said, Andy, he said, I got Billy Graham at my house. I don't know what to do with him. I got to go coach this football game. He said, can you come over? And so Dad said, sure. Well, I managed to insinuate myself into the group. My mother and my dad and I went over there, and he was there holding court. You know, I mean, this is Billy Graham, bigger than life. I remember he talked about his son Ned was 10 years old at the time, and he was there too. But Ned was for Texas that day because Texas was the number 2 giver to the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association. But wisely, Ned didn't let anybody know that. So Billy Graham gave the invocation that day, back when there still were such things before football games. But I would tell people this, you know, I just met him that one time. My dad had been to some of his crusades, I think, in New York. But when he said, God bless you, in that inimitable voice, you felt blessed, you know. And so that was a great hour. Rest of the day was great until about the last few minutes there, you know, and that one got away. But it's still, I don't know if I've ever seen a better effort by a football team than that day, even in a losing. Arkansas led 14-0, got a touchdown call back, and Texas scored at the end. But those guys from that team recently had a reunion. Bill Burnett was there, Gus Rusher was there, Pat Morrison, Chuck Dicus, Bobby Field. You know, Bobby Field was in the book about the 1969, about the Texas game, and he had met Richard. That's how the book started, was a meeting between former President Richard Nixon and Bobby Field. They just happened to see each other. And Bobby told me just recently, he said that they talked about the game, and he said, and then he went back to where his hotel was, and he saw Richard Nixon. This was after he was president. He saw him again. He wanted to talk about the game some more, and still had almost total recall of everything that happened that day. So unfortunately, he went to the Texas locker room. Now, I wasn't working back then. I was not yet. I had done one story for the Traveler, but I somehow got down there to the dressing rooms when it was over. I remember walking into the Texas dressing room, and Darrell Royal they'd thrown him into the shower, you know, in celebration, and he was telling all these sports writers that Arkansas was the best team, and James Street could not get his coat on without help. He got hit that hard that day by the Razorbacks. He needed help getting his coat over his right shoulder. And somebody asked him, you know, what Arkansas could do, and he said Arkansas can beat anybody. you know, and then the other guy was Big Woo, right? Wooster, that was the running back then, and he was, I mean, he was walking like he could not take another step to the bus, and they knew they had a heck of a challenge that day. I don't want to rattle on. Clay told me to speak for 3, 4, 5 minutes, and I'm probably gone a lot longer than that, but it's just, you know, when you do something your whole life and you try to do a reasonable job at it, when somebody calls you and tells you you're going into this thing, it's just a great honor, a great thrill. I'm so happy that y'all could come and be together today and enjoy this, and I can't wait to hear from the Jones family and hear more about Charlie Jones. But Chip, thank you again, and I feel like usually you do in these things, okay, I'll take questions now, but we're not doing that today, so here you go. Thank you very much.
All right. So I grew up in the 1970s. I'm not quite as old as Grant and Clay, but I'm moving there. Hopefully I'll make it that far. But in the 70s, I mean, there was nothing, you know, that I liked more on Sunday afternoons and watching, you know, professional football games on NBC or wherever they showed them. I've always, you know, always loved sports or whatever, but it just, back in those days, it just seemed like the best AFL games were always played on Sunday afternoon. Games in, you know, the Jets and the Chargers and the Chiefs and the Raiders, you know, those were just always great games. I always just loved those games, you know, and, you know, they were always played around 3 o'clock, and those games would get played, and then what was it, Disney, something, whatever they did, Disney came on after that. So Sunday was always a great day. But the thing, I mean, I always remember, I didn't know who the guy was who called the games, but I just always remember, man, that dude was just awesome. You know, Charlie Jones, man, you know, him describing Kenny Stabler, you know, playing on one leg, hobbling out there and finding somehow, you know, Dave Casper, the ghost to the post, you know, whatever, for a touchdown. And, you know, we'd go to school the next day, man, and I'm going to be Ken Stabler, I want to be this, and then we'd say, I'm going to be the guy that announces the games. And that's how much of an impact a little kid like me, way in Texas, got from Charlie Jones. I mean, when you heard Charlie Jones come on and do a game, you knew, man, this is going to be the big game. This is the big game this week. This dude's doing this game. It's going to be the big game. We always liked Fred Biletnikoff, too. Remember him, little guy for the Raiders, number 25, who wore stickum from the end of his hands. You know, his whole body was covered in yellow stickum. And I think I liked Fred Biletnikoff because his name sounded like my hometown, Malakoff. So always liked him, little not fast guy, you know, and just a hell of a player. So Charlie was a Fort Smith guy, and when I moved to Fort Smith in 1999, I'm like, wow, that dude is from here, he's from Fort Smith, that's awesome. And I just, you know, always thought that was just a really, really cool thing. Graduated from the University of Arkansas, worked for NBC for 30 years. Also was with the other two networks, ABC and CBS, but it's the years at NBC that I remember most. He's also broadcast other sports for them, did several Olympics. Randy Cross worked alongside of Charlie on a number of broadcasts, and here's how Randy remembered his former colleague.
Hi there, my name's Randy Cross, and I worked with Charlie Jones in the mid-90s on NBC. And heck, I was like everybody at that time. If you watched, I keep wanting to say the AFL, but it was the AFL and the old AFC. Sunday afternoons were amazing because you were watching Charlie or Dick Enberg or any one of, you know, a small number of play-by-play guys, national TV-wise, and they were amazing. I loved working with Charlie. He was a little grumpy by the time I got around to working with him because it was a little later in his career, but he was something. He really, really was something. And I would find myself.
Please help me welcome the legend, Charlie Jones, into the Arkansas Sportscasters and Sportswriters Hall of Fame. Accepting his award is Chuck. Chuck, there we go.
Thank you, Chip. I'd like to thank Matt Jones. I haven't met yet, but who's the one that emailed me about this? Thank you, Matt. And the committee, thank you very much for this honor. First, I'd like to explain why he might have been a little grumpy with Randy, because I think he was 49th out of 50 color announcers he worked with over the decades, combined with all the other sports that he did. So I've got two stories and a quick little follow-up on something else with Pat Summerall. So Dad's voice turned when he was 15 years old in 1945-46. And he decided he wanted to be one of those voices of the night, because he'd had a little crystal radio set that they listened to and got stations from Chicago and other major cities, New York City. So he walked into the local radio station in Fort Smith. And you've got to remember back in 1946 time frame, this was a man sitting behind the desk. You didn't have a man sitting behind the desk as a receptionist. The guy says, well, what do you want, kid? And Dad says, I want to become an announcer. He pauses and says, okay, kid, come on with me. Puts him in a booth and hands him some wire copy. Has him read for about 5 minutes. Opens the door and says, you've got a job. When can you start? And Dad goes, oh, we're negotiating. He goes, well, I don't know. Mother's waiting for me in the car. So he goes home, gets some food, comes back. He goes on about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, finishes at midnight, and he discovered that's what he wanted to do the rest of his life. So I'm going to fast forward about 15 years to 1960. And Lamar Hunt announces that he's forming the AFL. And so Dad decides, because he had always wanted to be the Razorbacks announcer for the rest of his life. You know, born, as Chip said, really, or Randy said, really loved Fort Smith in Arkansas. But there was an announcer with the Razorbacks that was young enough that Dad just knew he would never really break in. But Lamar announces the AFL, and Dad says, I'm going to be the Dallas Texans radio announcer. So he sends him resume, he sends him tapes, and doesn't hear back. Sends him resume, sends him tapes, doesn't hear back. Well, Dad decides that he's got a game in Texarkana on a Friday night. And so he and his brother Ira decide that Dad's going to go and show up at his office on Saturday, and they're going to mail him an alarm clock with a note saying that Charlie Jones, the voice of the Dallas Texans, is going to show up at your office. So there wasn't FedEx, there wasn't UPS, so they had to make sure he got there just before. So Dad does a game in Texarkana, drives down to Dallas, goes in the office on Saturday morning, and the secretary says, oh, you must be Charlie Jones. Mr. Hunt's really looking forward to meeting with you. However, he's meeting with the other owners of the AFL and can't see you until tomorrow afternoon. So back in 1960, he didn't have credit cards. He had about $6 in his pocket, enough gas to get back to Fort Smith. So the secretary said, don't worry, stay at the Hilton, sign for the meals, we'll pay for it, come back tomorrow. Goes back, meets with Lamar for a couple hours, has a great meeting. Lamar says, let me think about it. Dad goes back, he's in the office at the radio station on Monday, and Lamar calls and says, you've got the job. Dad says, great. Lamar says, how soon can you start? Well, the manager here has been really good to me, so let me give him a 2 weeks notice. So he goes to the manager's office and tells the manager, hey, I'm going to be moving to Dallas, I'm working for the Dallas Texans. The manager says, that's fine, why don't you just leave today? So Dad goes back and he's packing things up, and the phone rings and it's Lamar. And Lamar says, how'd it go? And Dad goes, one of the few times in his life he's at loss for words. And Lamar says, oh, he fired you. Don't worry, I'll put you on the payroll today and come on down and start next week. And that was the start of Dad's career that took him around the world to do sports. So the last story involves Pat Summerall, who he knew from college, and they were friends. At the very first Super Bowl, which was actually the AFL-NFL championship game, wasn't Super Bowl until number 3. It was broadcast by both NBC and CBS. Dad was a sideline reporter for NBC, and Pat was the sideline reporter for CBS. And they knew each other, so they decided they would share stories. Whatever they picked up, they would share. So that would work out. NBC had a special guest host. Sorry. Okay, sorry about that. So, the special guest host back in, 1967 was Bob Hope, which back then was the Taylor Swift of the year, as you know. Anyway, so he was going to do a halftime interview with Dad at the Super Bowl. So they didn't have suites there, so Bob Hope walks down through the crowd to get to Dad. Very recognizable figure. He gets down to Dad and said, "Biggest freaking mistake I ever made was walking down through that crowd." Anyway, just one of the many times that Dad was involved in huge events throughout the world, had a great career, and had found his passion when he was 15 years old. So again, thank you very much, and Julie's got something to say also.
Well, I'm Julie, and so you got to hear about my dad's career, but I want to tell you something about who he was as a father. So my dad always said he never worked a day in his life. Sports was everything to him. He loved it, so it was just natural for him to enjoy every single aspect of his life. He never worked. I mean, it was great. So our family was very into sports. Chuck and I played lots of sports. There was a time when, I don't know, maybe I was in middle school, my parents and the next door neighbors decided they're going to build a tennis court together behind both of our houses so we could continue playing sports. And that's what we did. I mean, my father taught me to play tennis. He taught Chuck to play tennis. We loved tennis and golf and every other sport. We played everything in high school. And our father was our #1 supporter and our #1 fan. So back in those days, when you're in high school, when we were growing up in the 70s and 80s, all the high school sports were played during the weekday. So if you think about it, most families, fathers were working Monday through Friday. My father worked the weekends. So in that case, my father, being the #1 supporter, #1 fan, came to every single high school game we were ever at. And there was one time, and my dad had written a letter. He had written a letter to me that he had published in the San Diego Union. And I happened to be reading it, and it said, "Remember how embarrassed you were at that volleyball game when I got upset at the officiating. But if you had looked around in the stands, you would have noticed that I was the only father there." And that is very true for, seemed like every single sport. My dad was the only one there, because nowadays all these games are played on the weekends, so of course the whole family gets to go. Back then that wasn't the case. And he even became the #1 fan because I played volleyball and field hockey, which was much more team oriented. And all my girlfriends loved having my father there because he was their #1 supporter as well. So it was really great. So he was our #1 fan, #1 supporter. We had a lot of fun, and I think down deep he probably wanted one of us to become pro in something, but we just never did. But other than that, that's just kind of who he was. He was fun. His voice being the voice of God. Our house was very long, and his office was in the very front, and our rooms were way in the back, and you would hear him yell, "Julie," and you're like, oh gosh, what did I do? As you walk down the hall thinking, what have I done, what have I done, what have I done, am I in trouble, am I in trouble? And you never were. But he just had the voice of God, and there are times where I still like watching football games and critiquing the current announcers and everything, because he was a great announcer. So thank you very much for this honor. He would have loved to be here for this, and he is with us for sure. So thank you very, very much.
If you guys would, make sure you hang around when the meeting ends so we can get some photos, Grant, and everybody. We want to get photos. We've got plaques here to give you, so make sure we get photos of that. What a great day. Honoring two gentlemen who are very deserving of this. And wow, I wish I could have met Charlie, because, you know, when you watch somebody on TV every Sunday, you feel like you know them. You know, you're like, I think I'd like to hang out with that guy. I have met a guy one time before I came to Fort Smith. I was in Kilgore, Texas for a couple of years, and met a guy named Terry Stembridge in Kilgore, if you remember that name. And he was sportscaster for a long time in the ABA. So he would know firsthand, you know, what Charlie felt like going through the AFL, a league that is never going to make it according to what they thought back then. And Terry was that same way with the ABA, and always loved those great stories like that.